My story begins back in 2002, 22 years ago. That was when I met my future wife. I was 20 years old and she was 18. We were both students, but I was already working part-time and had some independence from my parents. My future wife lived in her aunt's apartment so her aunt could look after her. Her parents and older brother were working up north. 3 months after we met, we started living together in her parents' apartment. Her parents and her aunt moved out. I fell in love with my girlfriend and we hit it off. We lived well and rarely argued. I introduced her to my parents. After 6 months of living together, I don't even remember why, but they liked her. A year later, I asked her to marry me, but she refused. It was a blow to me. I couldn't understand why she said no. We continued to live together without being married. It was my first serious relationship, while she had already had several breakups and even lived with someone before. I learned about all her exes gradually from her. One of her exes was a classmate she had lived with for 8 months before she met me. I was jealous sometimes, which was infuriating because I was young, naive, and inexperienced. I didn't see it as a red flag, just thought it was normal. She even dated a much older married man before me. She told me about it later. We lived normally. From time to time there were financial difficulties. I was a student and couldn't provide for the two of us. Her mother sent her money from up north. Her father wasn't working and drank a lot. Her parents visited a couple of times. They seemed to like me too. Our intimacy was great, every day and often more than once. I noticed right away that she was more experienced in bed than I was, knew what she was doing, and knew how to please. She clearly didn't learn from pictures. Then, in the 3rd year of our life together, I woke up on a summer Friday in 2005 alone in bed. She wasn't there. I couldn't reach her on her cell phone. I had a Nokia 3310 Legend at the time. They bought her a fancy LG with polyphony. Anyway, I couldn't get through to her. I waited until the evening thinking she might have gone on urgent business, and the phone died or was stolen. As the day went dark, I started calling hospitals. Suddenly, I got a text message from her saying that she was fine, wanted to be alone, and think about whether to be with me or not. I was shocked. I called her friend who lived 2 blocks away. I tried to find out what happened, but she came over Sunday night. On Monday morning, I talked to her. She said she had thought about it for a long time and decided to be with me, that she loved me very much, and so on. I didn't realize what was going on right away. Then a week later, early in the morning, I went to the kitchen to get breakfast before work. She was still asleep. I accidentally knocked her bag off the door handle. Some woman's stuff and a piece of paper with her handwriting on it fell out of the bag. I started to read it. It turned out to be a goodbye letter to a guy she'd been seeing over the weekend. She spent Friday through Sunday at the seaside with another classmate of hers, having a great time while I was worried sick. The letter said, "Thank you for a great time, great intimacy, you're super tender and passionate, but I'll stay with my boyfriend," which was me. I was furious. I woke her up and threw the letter in her face. We had a long talk the same day I packed my things and left. Not to my parents, but to a friend's place. I ignored her calls and texts. A week went by and her friend called saying she wanted to talk. She even went to my parents' house. I didn't tell my parents anything, so they were unaware that I'd been staying at a friend's place for a week. She realized my parents didn't know. She told them that I was missing and hadn't been in touch. She was very worried and wanted me to contact her. She told my parents we had just had a fight. People fight. And then I made one of the biggest mistakes of my life. I met her for a long talk. She started crying, snotting, and drooling, got down on her knees and swore she loved me. She asked for a chance and said she was ready to get married. Now I realize it was a total disaster. There were now 2 guys in her group she had already been with. She had lived with one for 8 months before me. But I forgave her. I hate myself for that. I forgave her with a lot of conditions. Soon I bought rings and we got engaged. I didn't go to any events with my college group anymore. She wasn't there either. She skipped a lot of school just to avoid getting expelled. And on graduation day, her father died. She was always and everywhere with me. Even though we were already wearing rings, we weren't planning a wedding. I graduated from university and started working full-time, and money got better. She couldn't find a job. It was really hard due to gender biases from employers. When she graduated from university, all contacts with her exes were broken. I cooled down with my jealousy, and we still lived in her parents' three-bedroom apartment. A year passed, and she wanted to get a second law degree online because she couldn't work in her current field, and working as a cashier in a store wasn't her level. I agreed and paid for her second education. I worked hard and started earning more money. We saved up money for our wedding, planning it ourselves instead of relying on our parents because the one who pays calls the shots. We had our wedding in 2007, about 2 years after her infidelity. Life after the wedding didn't change much, except that we bought a car, lived well, almost never quarreled, and often went on vacations. We lived happily. 3 more years passed. She graduated from her second university and started working for a management company. Then came the questions about children. After being together for so many years, it was time to have kids. We started thinking about children and tried for a long time, but it didn't work out. She had a health issue that wasn't related to her past adventures. After the 2008 crisis, we decided to try starting our own business, but it wasn't going well. The profit was small, whether it was the effects of the crisis or my inexperience. Then in 2010, she finally got pregnant. I was over the moon, and she was happy too. My mother-in-law arrived and said, "My children, I'm so glad. Take this apartment and live here. Neither I nor your brother have any claims." We started renovating the 3-bedroom apartment. I invested heavily in the renovation, thinking it belonged to us. I put in a lot of labor and money, changing all the electrical wiring to copper, updating plumbing, wallpaper, floors, doors, ceilings, and more. Major repairs plus new furniture in each room and an air conditioner. Our daughter was born in 2011, and I was very happy. But then my wife's older brother, who was also registered in the apartment, started causing trouble. He drank like their father and wasn't quite sane. He couldn't finish school and didn't have a diploma. My wife had 2 children and couldn't get her brother to move out. We were ready to move to a rented apartment away from this madhouse. I went back to work as a salaried employee because the business wasn't going well. My wife had a baby and my family needed to be fed. My mother-in-law offered me a good position with a decent income. She suggested selling the apartment and dividing it between my wife and her brother, buying something for her brother while we bought what we wanted. I always dreamed of a private house. We started looking and found a suitable one, 2 floors, needing some finishing. Later it turned out that the house had no screed, no fence or gates, no ceilings, no plumbing, and many other issues. My mother-in-law was delighted with our idea and supported it, saying she always dreamed of a house and would be happy if her children had one. She promised to help financially and babysit if necessary. We took out a mortgage in my name. My wife had only worked for about a year, so she was automatically a co-borrower. The ownership of the land and the house was 50-50 between me and my wife. My parents didn't want to divide their 3-room apartment to help us with a large sum of money, explaining that they had nowhere to go, and I also had a sister. My wife had a big fight with me, saying it wasn't fair. My mother-in-law still had service housing up north, and my parents had nowhere to go. My parents decided to help pay the mortgage. I was earning a decent salary, and we were excited about the plans. Our daughter would grow up and go to kindergarten. My mother-in-law, as promised, would come to help, and my wife and I would pay off the mortgage with our 2 incomes. We moved into our own house in 2013 and started renovations. It was hard for me both physically and financially. I didn't calculate my strength and pulled as hard as I could. Gradually, I did everything. My mother-in-law helped financially from time to time. The renovation stretched for 5 years. My mother-in-law planned to live with us in her old age. I wasn't against it, but my wife and mother-in-law had constant conflicts, and our plans didn't work out. Our daughter was often ill, and my mother-in-law didn't come to help as promised. My wife took care of the baby, and I worked hard, both at my job and at home. I also went on occasional business trips, usually for 2 days, but almost every month. My wife was alone during these trips, leading to periodic scandals. The apartment bought for my wife's brother was registered to my wife because her brother was a drunk and couldn't handle it. In 2016, her brother died, and the apartment remained in my wife's name. My mother-in-law took over the apartment. Our daughter never went to kindergarten. requiring constant medical treatment, which also needed finances. My wife was going crazy from being at home all the time, dealing with the loss of her brother. There were nerves, scandals, and panic attacks. I supported her as much as I could, paying for her to see a therapist. It got to the point of serious medication and visits to a psychiatrist. I was very tired from work and busy at home. My wife was struggling, and I got hooked on an online game called World of Tanks to escape the hard reality. It wasn't booze or gambling, but it was still an addiction. I played almost every day after work until midnight or later. This led to more arguments. I explained that therapy and medication were helping her, while the game was my way to have fun for free. Our intimacy became less frequent and worse because I was tired, and so was she. When my mother-in-law visited, we'd leave the baby with her and try to spend time together, but it wasn't always possible. My mother-in-law had her own plans and didn't want to stay with her granddaughter for long. My parents didn't want to take care of the child either. There was an incident when my daughter, at around 2 years old, seriously poisoned herself after a visit to my parents. Another time when my mother was babysitting at our house, my daughter fell down the stairs and broke her leg. The statistics were disappointing, and at a young age my daughter wasn't left with my parents anymore. When my wife and I managed to go out with friends, relatives, or acquaintances, I began to notice that she often flirted with other men. This led to more arguments. She said she was at home too long and needed social interaction. I periodically gave up the game for a few months but always came back, and the addiction progressed. I tried to help my wife in her quest for self-actualization. Psychotherapy and medication helped her. Our daughter went to school, but her frequent illnesses didn't allow my wife to get a regular job, and we couldn't afford a nanny. This was our routine through the first and second grade. My wife got tired of being at home with the baby and thought a freelance job would be a good fit. She was interested in psychotherapy from a therapist's point of view and wanted to learn. I supported her training as a therapist, paying for her 3rd degree. Since she started, she felt better, and there were fewer scandals. Then we come to the denouement in 2020. I fell ill hard, and it was a big blow to my body. My lungs took 6 months to recover physically. I was in bad shape, and our intimacy became infrequent because I just didn't feel like it. About a year and a half ago, she started going through a lot of changes during her training process. There are these things called intensives, where a big bunch of therapists and clients go to one place for 10, 14 days for sessions, training, and so on. It's required by the university to attend at least 2 intensives, usually in spring and summer at the sea, and it costs a lot of money. I didn't have enough money, so she ended up going alone to an intensive at the sea in July. I was worried sick. I called her often, asking her to send me photos and videos. She reassured me, saying it was therapeutic ethics and no one sleeps with each other. She came back from this intensive with a different password on her phone. She explained it by saying she was around people more often, and it was for security purposes. In the fall of 2021, she and our daughter fell ill with the virus, but I didn't get reinfected as it seemed I had strong natural immunity. Then in the same fall, the question of starting her own practice as a therapist came up. I rented her an office downtown, bought furniture and stuff, and all kinds of supplies. Of course, she had no clients at first, and I paid for the office. I had been playing tanks very rarely for about a year and eventually stopped playing altogether because I lost interest. But I was also very tired from work. After her first intensives, her libido increased sharply, and she wanted intimacy more often than I did. Whether it was fatigue or the aftermath of COVID, I don't know, but I tried to satisfy her. However, she started flirting with other men, which naturally pissed me off. Scandals started again, and I told her I wanted a divorce. She began looking after herself more, dyed her hair a different color, and lost weight. I realized something was wrong. You know the saying, if you think you're being lied to, you probably are. But she insisted she just wanted to be beautiful and on par with her female co-workers, which made sense. She never left her phone anywhere. She kept it with her, even in the shower. In February, she broke the screen on her phone, and on Valentine's Day, I gave her a new one and took the old one for parts since I'm into electronics. I put her old phone in the tool closet and forgot about it. In May 2022, she went on another intensive trip to the sea. Our daughter got sick and money was tight again. I let her go alone and paid for the hotel and transportation. I should have borrowed money and gone with her. She called me every day and sent me photos and videos. When it was time to come back, she called and asked if she could return by car instead of the train, because her coworker, who was from the same town, was driving soon. It was more comfortable and faster, and she wouldn't be alone. Another woman would be with them. I agreed and planned to meet her when she arrived to help with the luggage. I arrived with our daughter to meet my wife. A woman got out of the back seat of the car, her colleague dressed in jeans and a turtleneck. Then my wife stepped out from the passenger seat in a tight red dress with a huge cleavage, stiletto heels, fishnet stockings, and bright lipstick. The driver got out third to open the trunk. My wife ran up to him, kissed him on the cheek, and thanked him for the ride. Her colleague saw this and kissed him on the cheek too. I was stunned, and it was right in front of me and my daughter. I quickly walked towards them. The look on my face must have made the guy suspect something was wrong because he got in the car and drove off. He was smaller and obviously weaker than me. I didn't make a scene with the child there. Instead, I had a plan to drop my daughter off at my parents' house on the way back and spend a romantic evening with my wife, thinking we both were craving intimacy after more than 10 days apart. But after seeing this, all desire vanished. Instead of a romantic dinner, we had a huge argument. She explained her appearance by saying they went straight to the car after the closing event, and she didn't have time to change because the driver had to leave urgently. She claimed everyone dressed like that at the event, but she didn't show any pictures. She said she didn't take any at the closing, which was strange because she always took pictures. I told her to ask her colleagues for pictures and show them to me. This led to more arguments. She accused me of being jealous and controlling. At the end of May, I cracked my phone screen. Instead of buying a new phone since it was only a year old, I decided to change the screen myself. I always need to stay in touch, so I remembered my wife's old phone, which had been in the closet since February. I charged it and turned it on, deciding to read the messages. I was more surprised than ever. Some guy had written, "Thank you for the hug." I started to feel sick and decided to check her current phone. While I wasn't speaking to her, she noticed I was gloomy. Naturally, I didn't want her anymore. Our intimacy practically disappeared on my initiative. In the summer, we planned a trip for our daughter to strengthen her immunity. Initially, we wanted to go for 10 days, but I couldn't get away from work for that long. During this time, my mother-in-law was coming, so I bought a trip to a resort for 20 days for the three of us. My mother-in-law would be with us for the first 10 days, and she paid for 30% of the trip. I managed to look at my wife's current cell phone, but all correspondence was erased, and the chat settings were set to auto-clear. It was all very suspicious. I started Googling signs of infidelity and realized I had been blind. The message thanking her for the hug on the old phone and the erased chats made me furious. I confronted her, and she accused me of being paranoid and jealous. She claimed the man she thanked was just a colleague who supported her after a bad session at the intensive. I couldn't take it anymore and decided to get a divorce. She demanded I give her the old phone, saying it was her property and I had no right to it. Realizing there might be more hidden secrets, I did some more digging and found an audio recording of her telling a friend how she slept with another therapist and how it boosted her self-esteem. I was horrified by the betrayal. I had never cheated on her, always provided for her and helped her family. In return, I got betrayal. Then another twist happened. My mother-in-law decided to give her nephew an apartment registered in my wife's name but actually belonging to my mother-in-law. For this, a notary needed permission from me as a spouse. Already determined to divorce, I refused, saying I didn't want to worsen my financial situation before deciding what to do with the property. This led to our first major scandal in 20 years. I learned a lot about myself from her accusations, claiming I was an abuser and so on. In anger, I let her listen to the recording, confirming the affair. I suspected my mother-in-law knew about the affair, but I was too freaked out to think clearly. My mother-in-law took offense and left. Thoughts crept in that this situation was no coincidence. The sudden push to transfer the apartment to my nephew after I told my wife I was getting a divorce seemed suspicious. After her brother's death, the apartment had been in my wife's name for many years, and no one cared about it. It seemed like my mother-in-law was afraid I would go after her apartment, too. I had always tried to live by my conscience, and I knew the apartment was really my mother-in-law's. So a couple of days later, I gave my consent and the transfer was quickly formalized. Then I made another mistake. I decided to do a DNA test on my daughter. Instead of doing it discreetly with a hair sample, I angrily told my wife that we would go to the lab the next morning for a test. We went to the lab and I told my daughter it was a test before our trip to the sea. She guessed what it was for, but thankfully our relationship wasn't affected. She loves me very much and it didn't seem to impact her then, but who knows about the future. This happened a week before the trip to the sea. My wife asked if I wanted to cancel the trip, but I decided not to ruin my daughter's vacation. My mother-in-law went with them for the first 10 days. During the trip, it was hell for my daughter. Every day she wrote to me saying that Mom and Grandma were constantly discussing how bad of a dad I was and thinking about how to kick me out. The room was small and she had nowhere to go, so she had to listen to it. I was furious. I called my wife and forbade her from discussing me in front of our daughter. It worked for a few days. I loved my daughter madly and was racking my brain about what to do if the test result was negative. I waited for the result every day while living alone, celebrated my 40th birthday, read forums, worked and waited. Finally, the day before I had to go to the seaside to switch places with my mother-in-law, the result came. I rushed to the lab. My daughter was mine. A stone fell from my soul. I went to the sea with a great desire to see and hug my daughter. When I arrived, my daughter ran to me and a scandal ensued with my wife. She demanded I give her the test results as proof of her honesty. I decided to keep the test and sent her a photo instead. Perhaps I thought it would be a reminder that her actions had consequences. We agreed to bury the hatchet until the end of the trip to give our daughter a vacation. We went on excursions and my daughter was happy. Upon returning home, an unpleasant situation emerged. My mother-in-law had told relatives that I did the test. Even some neighbors found out. People just love to gossip. After returning from the sea, the arguments with my wife continued. My relationship with my daughter remained excellent. We spent time together, went for evening jogs, and so on. My daughter periodically complained that my wife and her mother discussed me negatively over the phone. In August, it was our wedding anniversary. 15 years of official marriage and 20 years together. I was determined to divorce, but for some reason, I bought my wife a ring with garnet and a diamond, perhaps to show her what she was losing because of her actions. I gave her the ring with the words, "These are for the wonderful moments we once had." I made it clear that it was the last gift. I can't explain my actions now. After that, she turned on what I call demo mode. She was loving and attentive, kept the house perfectly clean, cooked delicious food tailored to my tastes, and there was passionate intimacy. She even got up early to serve breakfast, and not a single complaint was directed at me. The contrast after the arguments was huge. I began to ask about the reasons for this change, but she gave no clear answer. She just said, "Well, you like it, so enjoy." I gave her my old phone back as I had copied everything I needed. The divorce decision was still on my mind, but the sweetness of the demo mode made me hesitate. 10 days ago, the demo mode failed. My wife said she wanted to get a tattoo on her chest. I was against it and expressed my disagreement. She said it would be small, temporary, and not visible under a t-shirt, claiming it would boost her low self-esteem. I told her not to dare get any tattoo. We had another argument. I thought this would be another test of my significance, but in the end she got a tattoo on her chest. It wasn't small or temporary, it was large and permanent. I realized she had no regard for my feelings. I told her I was filing for divorce and demanded that she not have intimacy with anyone until the official divorce. I feel incredibly sorry for my daughter. She loves me, and I love her too, but the chances of taking her away are slim. I'm studying this matter carefully. My wife openly said that if I tried to take our daughter through the court, she would limit my time with her. This is how much we care for our child. We live in one house, my wife, daughter, and I. The house and land are owned 50/50 by me and my wife, but there is still a mortgage that cannot be prepaid. Neither of us can afford to pay it off entirely. I'm working on the issue of selling it, which should be enough for both of us. Besides, she has another apartment in the suburbs that she inherited from her godmother, whom we looked after together. I constantly helped with repairs and everyday chores. I need to calm my nerves a bit before submitting an application for the home valuation and division of other property. I'm not going to quibble over forks and spoons, but I do want to ensure we fairly divide cars, large appliances, and money. I've made an appointment with a psychologist. I know I was foolish not to leave after the first betrayal. Now it's more complicated with our daughter and the property, and I'm already 40 years old. I want to consult further with a lawyer because dividing everything is a long and complicated process, especially now that the family has fallen apart. The divorce process was as challenging as I expected. It took months of negotiations, lawyer meetings, and court appearances to finalize everything. We managed to sell the house and split the proceeds. My ex-wife kept her apartment in the suburbs, and I used my share to buy a smaller, more manageable home closer to my workplace. Our daughter, now in her early teens, had the difficult choice of deciding where to live. After much discussion and emotional conversations, she chose to live with her mother during the school week and spend weekends and holidays with me. This arrangement allowed her to maintain stability while still having significant time with both parents. Despite the turmoil, my relationship with my daughter remained strong. We bonded over our weekend activities, bike rides, movie nights, and cooking together. I made sure she knew she could always talk to me about anything. The trust we built helped her navigate the changes in our family life. Looking back, I have mixed feelings. The pain of betrayal and the frustration of the prolonged divorce are still fresh, but so are the lessons I learned. If there's one thing I can tell anyone going through a similar situation, it's this: never ignore the red flags. Trust your instincts and prioritize your well-being and that of your children. Seek professional help if you need it. Talking to a psychologist was one of the best decisions I made. It helped me process my emotions and become a better parent. Be honest with your kids, but shield them from unnecessary adult conflicts. They need love and stability more than anything. Lastly, never underestimate your strength. Life can throw curveballs, but with perseverance and support, you can overcome them. Stay true to your values and don't be afraid to start over if that's what's best for you and your loved ones.